This is Robbed Over for Boxing Social in association with Betfred. Delighted, as always, to be joined once again by Mr. Frank Warren for part 2 of our, I guess you could probably call it, not boxing life stories, sorry Tris Dixon. This is your life in boxing, I think we'll call it. What do you reckon?
Call it what you like. Whatever you want to call it, mate.
Obviously, the first part of this interview was done in Las Vegas. Went down very well, you'll be pleased to hear. So we're bringing you part 2. Going to try and pick it up from where we left off. We were in the middle, towards the end of the whole kind of Naseem Hamed affair, should we call it. We went through kind of, let's say, the good times, and we touched briefly upon some of the bad times. We won't dally on it, because there's plenty to talk about. But the Kevin Kelly fight, obviously it's a fight that's always referred back to. Pretty much every time a Brit now goes to America, people talk about the Kevin Kelly-Naseem Hamed fight. Just how exciting was it to be a part of, not just the fight itself, which is obviously a brilliant fight, but the whole build-up and bringing Naz to New York?
Well, we worked very hard. I mean, we built Naz into a big star over in the UK, and we did a deal when Don King and I parted ways. We did a deal with HBO, who were then quite heavy in boxing. Probably, it was them and Showtime were the two big channels in the States, and they asked us to bring him over, and we thought it was the right time. And they went to New York, and we found a New York fighter in Kevin Kelly, who had quite a good record and was a good fighter. So for Naz to make his debut there, problem was, I think it was about a week before Christmas, if that. Everybody was saying we were mad to go to Madison Square Gardens. No one would promote shows that late in the year, near the Christmas time. Bob Arum said we wouldn't sell tickets and so forth. But we did the deal. And I did the deal with, back then with, now I can't remember his name now, we're going to have to edit this. His name will come to you in a minute, but anyway, I'd done the deal with HBO, and at that time Lou DiBella was working with them as well. And we done it on the proviso that they guarantee us certain things. Excuse me. One was that we would get a lot of advertising out there. Excuse me. Bloody flu as well as this back. So we did a lot of they would guarantee us some advertising. They would we'd get some adverts over Lincoln Tunnel, Times Square, but they plastered it. I mean, they really did do a good job at HBO with it, and also that we would get some good sort of PAs for him, personal appearances on shows and so forth. He'd done a promo with Chris Rock, who was flying at the time in the States. He was like he's the young comedian. Everyone loved where they done it. It was a great thing. It was like a rip-off of the Psycho film where, the shower scene, curtains open, and it was Chris Rock. So it was fun what they did. And Naz was good at that. And the one thing about Naz, he got it. He understood that. And then the next thing we did was got David LaChapelle, who's probably one of the top photographers in the world, fashion industry and whatever, very creative. And he did the famous photograph with Naz with his gloves on fire, which was a great shoot. So yeah, HBO really got into it, and as a result, we was there. We had the press conference, flew out, parked ourselves out in New York, and it was very, it was really lively. Unfortunately, prior to that, Naz and Brendan had a fallout, split up, then I got them back together again. But as a result of that, Brendan did a book, or made some comments in a book called The Paddy and the Prince, which Nick Pitt, respected writer, wrote. And that was published more or less at the same time, and some of the things that the late Brendan said, didn't go down well with Naz, and it undone it, and the atmosphere became quite toxic between everyone. Not with me, I mean with them, and it was trying to keep it together. But it was a fantastic event. We had a record sellout for featherweights in New York of a show in Madison Square Garden. I think I was the first British guy to ever promote a boxing show there. We did. It was a really good card. I mean, the place was, lots and lots of celebrities show up. I remember what's his name, Brosnan. Piers Brosnan was there. ringside. Lots of stars there. Donald Trump showed up. He came to our after fight party afterwards. Obviously, he wasn't a president back then. So everybody was there. I mean, lots of stars were there. Lots of people came over to see it. And it was an exciting fight. Naz went over, got caught, got clipped, went down. The both of them went down quite a few times during the fight. So everybody's on the edge of their seats. And in the end, Naz just broke Kevin's heart and stopped him, and that was it.
You mentioned being kind of the first British promoter to take a show over to New York, to Madison Square Garden and promote a show there. What was that like for you on a personal note? I appreciate at the time you're not one to blow your own trumpet, but now looking back and kind of seeing what a spectacle it was, must be nice, must be a proud feeling.
Well, it was okay, it was good, and I enjoyed that. There was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, that while the show was on, there were people trying to get into Naz, the usual that happens, and the Yanks, Americans do that. That's what they are, they do, and there was all sorts of problems. There was a problem, we never got the contract signed and got it back from Cedric Kushner, who at that time was the promoter of Kevin Kelly. And I remember at the press conference, or it might have been Wayne on the press conference, probably the press conference on the Thursday, I said, where's the contract? Oh, we'll do it after. I said, we won't do anything afterwards, we'll do it now. No, I said, well, there ain't going to be a press conference. And Naz said, let's get on with it. I said, no, you do what you got to do in the ring, I'll do what we've got to do outside the ring. And cut long story short, we held everyone up, got Kevin over and everybody, and they all signed the agreement that they'd been holding for probably 8 weeks. You get all these things sometimes with fights. Oh, I had to sign a contract the day of the fight or the day before. Well, you didn't get it the day before. You had it in your possession for 8 weeks. The fact that you've drawn it out that long and not come back about it, that's down to you. That's not down to us. So you get that. You get that scenario happens on occasions, and everybody always says, "Oh, the poor fighter. He's been taken advantage of." Not at all. You had the contract in your possession, so you should have done something with it. You got lawyers, you got advisors, you got a promoter. And in the end, it was signed. So that was that, and we got the fight on.
You mentioned Pierce Brosnan is just one name of many that you could have picked out around the time, that real glory years, really, of British boxing, that everybody even now reverts back to, that 90s era when you had the likes of, I know people who came to your shows, the Gallaghers, Oasis, etc. Explain and describe what that kind of era was like, and what was it like having these people come to fights on a regular basis?
Well, it's great. I mean, Gordon Ramsay, who became a big friend of mine from, when I used to go to restaurants in the early days, he came to all the fights, him and Marcus Waring, who was then working with him. All those guys come along, you said, Aces. All sorts of people. I remember from Pulp, what's his name? My brain's gone. Come on. Oh, well,
Here's Monday morning, we'll let you off.
Anyway, well, you can let me off it anyway. But all the guys showed up. They were all, we used to get them there, and it was nice. It's nice to get a few celebrities there, and a lot of footballers came along. Sort of movie star Helen Mirren. She used to come to a few of the shows with her husband Taylor Hackford, who was a really a great director. He did When We Were Kings. He was a really nice guy. She was lovely. But we had all sorts of people come along to the shows.
How would you compare the modern era of boxing to that 90s era? What's the difference? What's the same? Is it better now, worse now?
It was more pioneering back then, because you never, we had a contract with originally with Showtime, and then all the British fighters were getting regular exposure in the States. I mean, lots of exposure on Showtime. All of our shows were being broadcast back, so all those guys benefit from that. All the way from from Naz through to Kawasaki, Steve Collins, some of the Eubanks couple of fights that Eubanks had for us. All of those were broadcast back to the States, so it's brilliant. Frank Bruno, all of them were getting great exposure. So it was exciting times, and we were doing some really good quality shows, as we always do, and most of the shows were sellouts in big stadiums all the time. We was doing it on a regular basis, and bringing and developing young fighters and bringing them through all the time. So that was quite exciting, but that's what we're doing now. Same things we're doing now. We've got a great roster now, which I'm really delighted with, and some of the young fighters that are with us now that have committed themselves to be with us for the future.
You mentioned Don King when we were talking about Naz. He's somebody you've had a few encounters with, should we say, over the years, both good and bad. Talk to me about you first encountering Don King. I mean, I think a lot of our viewers, or a lot of boxing fans in general, maybe obviously haven't dealt with Don, maybe have a a skewed idea of him as a person? You've dealt with him, you know him fairly well, as well as anybody. Talk to me about your relationship with Don King.
Well, my relationship with Don was, I'd met him first time I met him was in the 70s. When I was a fight fan, going out to see fights late 70s, going out to see a couple of fights out in the States, and when he came over once. But then I got into promoting, and once I was in that, we were talking regularly. Then we did to start doing done a few shows together with him. Back in Birmingham, I remember Pat Cowdell fought Azuma Nelson. We did a few more, and then we got together to do. Barry Hearn at the time had the promotional rights for Chris Eubank and Nigel Benn, but he couldn't get the event. He couldn't raise the money to get the two fighters together. So Don got involved to bring in Showtime, and I did the deal with ITV. I got a really good deal out of them, big money in those days, to get the fight on. And that was our sort of, when we started getting our shows together. And that there were some problems behind the scenes which you can read about in my book and documentary that's being filmed at the moment.
Free plug.
Sorry?
Free plug.
Well, you don't pay me for doing this, do you? So anyway, he was, he was very engaged. He was funny. I mean, he had this, obviously, a lot of people were saying a lot of bad things about him, but you speak as you find. He was an extraordinary good promoter. Put some great fights together. He was quite fearless when it come to putting the money up and making these shows happen. And he was obviously a great self-promoter as well. But I enjoyed it. I had some good times with him, but it went wrong at the end.
You mentioned fearless. That's quite an interesting word. What makes a fearless boxing promoter? Would you consider yourself fearless?
Well, I think it's just having self-belief and belief in yourself to do. If you've got your eye on the prize, then make sure you deliver and go all the way and do it. And I suppose if you want to say it's fearless, I'm quite determined. And if I can make it happen, I'll make it happen.
You are determined. Phrase that's always bandied about in various walks of life, but it's ones that I've heard likened to you as more comebacks than Sinatra. Though you know Frank Sinatra, or you don't know him now, but you've met Frank along the way.
I promoted Frank Sinatra's shows. I brought him over here when I owned London Arena, and I put him on. He did some shows for me. I know him very well. Yeah.
What was that like? I mean, Frank Sinatra is like one of the most sort of celebrated figures of the last 100 years. What was that like?
Well, he was a really nice guy. I mean, we went for dinner and we had good times. I went to his shows in the States. He looked after us there. He was an extremely charming man, and didn't suffer fools. Didn't like the press, and he didn't like giving interviews. Stopped all that. But he was an extremely charming man, and more importantly, he was a very talented musician. And obviously a great singer, and he was fantastic company.
How did that come to pass? How did Frank Warren from Islington bump into Frank Sinatra and work together?
Because I built an arena in London Arena, 12,000 seat venue, and I had to get events on there, and he was one of the events that we brought in there. We put lots of events on in London Arena, and other promoters as well put on there, but. That was in the days when there was a lot of entrepreneurism, and then there was a terrible recession where the interest rate, I think, went to about 16%. So it was tough times for a lot of people. I think nearly 80% of the business down in Docklands all went bust. But comebacks, I haven't been anywhere. I've been doing what I've been doing solidly involved with all the top names in boxing since I've got into the sport. So I don't know what that's all about. I don't know what that's all about. I haven't gone away and done anything. All I've continued to do is do what I always do, which is build and develop the best young fighters, the best fighters. And I think certainly up till about 6-7 years ago, I would say nearly 100% all the fighters, the good fighters that come through were with me, well 99% maybe. After that, it's probably been about 80%. Now, it's all the guys. We're back in there. You look at all our roster of fighters. We've got the best. Tyson's with us. Joe Joyce is with us. Daniel Dubois. I mean, who wouldn't like all those on your books? you know, as heavyweights. And we've got the best heavyweight in the world, and we've got, you know, the two of the best young ones, or sorry, not young ones, two of the best around, and certainly in Daniel Dubois, I think the best young one around. Lots of good fighters. I mean, we did, you know, when you think with Josh Warrington, what we've done with him. Josh Warrington was with Matchroom, and they couldn't do anything with him. They didn't do anything. They didn't do him any justice or service. Came with us, and look what's happened with him. So we're good at what we do. So it's not about comebacks. It's about doing what you've got to have a bit of knowledge also in the sport. And sometimes, you know, you get into positions, you get some luck, you make your own luck, but you get some luck, you get somebody who wants to get involved in the game, they want to throw a lot of money at it like DAZN did. DAZN have, and they've thrown fortunes at it. I mean, they put money into the sport, which is terrific, but madness, you know, from their perspective. The money they've invested, and what I'm understanding that you know, what they paid out, they could have done that on a much more healthier budget. So now they've got to recoup their monies. It'll be interesting to see whether they do or they don't. But it's been great for the sport. It's more exposure. We'll see whether they continue and see what moves forward. In the meantime, we're in a great position. We're going to make a huge announcement concerning our future, and BT, hopefully, I hope we're going to do it before Christmas, but it's going to be great news for certainly BT customers, for us and for boxers, and more importantly for the fans. So we're about to do that. We've got a couple other bits of good news that we're going to be broadcasting soon. So it's not a question of comebacks. It's a question of just keep doing what you're doing, keep working hard. I mean, we've got a very good team here, a very good team. It's probably the strongest backroom team that I've had for a long time, or I've been working with for a long time. You know, my boys are all doing well in it. We've got great PR department. We've got, you know, everyone in here is all contributes. They all deliver, and that's what it's all about for us. And we're constantly striving and working hard to deliver bigger and better shows. And next year, get our 2 shows out of the way before Christmas, and next year we're going to have some really good stuff. I mean, we've got Tyson going in with Deontay Wilder in February, which is the best heavyweight fight out now. You know, Anthony Joshua against Ruiz is an intriguing fight, but it's not the best. It's not the best fight in the best. The best fight in the best is Deontay Wilder against Tyson Fury, and that takes place in February.
We look forward to that, which is something that we'll come on to after we've done this. But it's back about you. You're very selfless, talking about Tyson and everybody else. Talk about yourself. You mentioned kind of having your backroom staff and your backroom team. A big part of that is your family. Your sons will work. Well, your sons work with you here. You've also got brothers and cousins and nephews, etc., scattered around the boxing business. What's that like for you, kind of having it as a family business? Because obviously it wasn't that when you were young, and it's now you've created this family business that you've got your sons and the rest of your family working in.
Well, I didn't want my sons working in the business at all. I've said that in various interviews earlier, but they're, you know, obviously they've grown up watching boxing, being involved in it. I mean, they didn't come to shows till they were, you know, not you know, young kids. I mean, they were a little bit older before they come to shows, but they just love the sport. They're involved in it, and at the end of the day, they've all got a good education. They all went to university, and I wanted them to go off and do other things. But that's what they decided they want to do. So you've got to support them. So I've done that. But they all hold their own. They're all very capable in doing what they do, and I'm very proud of all of them in their endeavours. And if it's become a family business, that's what it is. I've got a few nephews. That's my brother Robert. Same thing. You know, the family's always been boxing mad. You know, we've had cousins who've boxed. We've had, you know, my uncle boxed in the army. My dad had a few fights in the army. So they've all had some. Yeah, they've been a bit of boxing background.
You say you didn't want them to work in boxing. Why not?
Because I wanted them to do something else. I did it because I had to do it. Not I had to, but because I didn't know any different. You know, I didn't have the opportunity of a university education. I didn't have the opportunity. I mean, I passed my 11 plus. I went to a grammar school, but I didn't go to. I left school when I was 14 and a half. I didn't go to school anymore. I just didn't go anymore. I just bunked off and never went. And I regret that because, you know, I always did well at school. I was always in the top 3 in the early years when I was interested in school, and did quite well. But I want to have a broader horizon. For me, boxing's been great. 'Cause I've met people that I've never dreamed of meeting. I've met my heroes from when I was a young kid. You know, I hosted when they brought out a video of at London Arena many years ago with George Foreman, Joe Frazier, and Muhammad Ali. I mean, we hosted that, so the three of them in the room, sitting with them, we're all talking. I mean, these are kids' dreams come true, you know, meeting heroes like that, and promoted George Foreman. I brought him over and he fought for me over it. So, you know, all has been great, but you always want something. You know, in an ideal world, a parent wants your sons or your daughters to do something different, but they're doing what they want to do, and if they're happy doing what they want to do, then I'm happy.
What do you think you would have done if it wasn't being a boxing promoter?
Well, I was involved in clubs and pubs when I was a kid, and I was I sort of nearly did some shows. I nearly promoted. I was quite close to putting Blondie on at Stamford Bridge, Chelsea, many years ago. He was working on that in the sort of late 70s with a kid when I grew up called Barry Kane, who went on to edit a few music magazines and he's written a few books. And we had the introduction, and we went to see them. I would have been involved in something like that. I know I would have been doing that. Or nightclubs. That's what I was involved in.
You mentioned you brought George Foreman over. You also brought another American heavyweight over a couple of times, Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
Talk to me about your experience of working with Mike Tyson. We'll start with the first fight, which was obviously in Manchester against Julius Francis. What was that like, and bringing him over for that?
It was very interesting. When I brought him over, he was, how can I put it? He was, it was, I think, at the time, the Lennox Lewis's former promoter, Greek guy, I can't think of I'm terrible now, I can't think of their names. It'll come to me in a minute. He was they were trying to bring him over, and Jay Larkin, the late Jay Larkin, who was the vice president of Showtime and ran all their boxing, he called me and told me. So I said, look, I'll do it, don't worry about that. Shelley Finkel was involved with Mike Tyson back then, and eventually we got a deal together and we brought him over. And he came over, and he was good as gold. He was, a lot of people were against him coming here, but he came in. He got him in, and there's some opposition which you can read, get more detail about it in my book and in the documentary that's coming out. And it was quite interesting. And he was okay. He had his moments. He went on a massive spending spree whilst he was here. He'd come out of prison. It was a bit of a thing, really, because by then I'd fallen out with King, and King had been promoting him. And that, Jay was incensed with what happened between King and myself. He weren't very happy about that. And I remember him saying at the time, when we made our settlement, where we paid King a settlement sum, and he had to then took all his interest away from all the British fights because he was partnering them, so we got the contracts back, come to a settlement, and Jay said we'll get that back 10 times over, and that's what exactly happened. So I promoted Mike Tyson, and obviously the other shows we did, and at the time I think Don had been the exclusive promoter at Showtime, and that all fell away, which pissed him off. With Jay, helped to, or was the other half of the party that launched Showbox in the States. We launched that, and we did shows in the UK. So it was all interesting times with Mike Tyson, but as I say, went on a spending spree, spent some ridiculous amounts of money, and left an unpaid bill here.
So that was your first time with Mike Tyson. All went swimmingly. Second time with Mike Tyson, not as smooth as I'm led to believe.
Well, we announced a show up in Scotland, put it on sale, sold 38,000 tickets in a couple of days. Then he wasn't coming in, so we had to send all the tickets back, cancel the show, etc., etc. Then about 8 days later, they said they want to bring him back, and it was a mess. And I should have actually said no, we'll postpone it to another time, but they were locked in there. And the fact of the matter is, he owed Showtime a truckload of money, and they were trying to recoup their money. But we put it on. Obviously, it was difficult for people who were booking tickets to rebook hotels and things. It was a mess. And we did it at, I think it's Hampden Park in Scotland. And there's all sorts of problems behind the scenes. He'd left there was still the unpaid bill, which had to be settled, and people issued proceedings against him and me. What they issued him against me for, I don't know, because I wasn't wearing a jury, and I certainly wasn't laying out millions for him for jury. So anyway, it happened. There was little bit of problems behind the scenes. We had some disagreements, but at the end of the day, he fought, and he paid for the jury.
I mentioned you had disagreements. Now, you know what I'm about to ask you. There was an awful lot of rumours swirling around that you had yourself a little fracas with the baddest man on the planet. Can you tell me anything about that? Alleged fracas?
He fought, and he paid for his jury.
Who did he fight, you?
No, he fought Lou Savarese, it was. He was uptight on the night, but you'll read all about it in our book, and it'll be in our documentary.
See, I wasn't aware of this documentary before I came in today, so all of these good questions I've got to ask you.
Good question. I'm giving you an answer. I'm teased. You've got an exclusive. There's a documentary.
Not an exclusive until Netflix asks for the rights. Anyway, Mike Tyson, what was it like having him over? Because
what was it like having Mike Tyson? When he's in a good mood, it's brilliant. When he's in a bad mood, he was a complete prick. What do you want me to say? But here's a guy that everybody was saying yes to all the time. Yes, yeah, Mike. Oh, was that all right? Yeah, and if he had a shout up, yeah, if it was pitch black, and he said the sun was shining, yeah, the sun's shining, Mike. That's how they were with him, and unfortunately, that's not my way, and that was it.
how much do you think he'd be worth in modern money, so to speak? If Mike Tyson, maybe that Mike Tyson or the Mike Tyson from before he went away, was around today, how big of a star do you think he would be?
He'd be huge. He was, at his best, he was probably the one of the most exciting young heavyweights that they've ever been. He was a complete wrecking machine, wasn't he? He could box, though. He had great head movement, great jab. He was a student of boxing, but he just went totally off the rails. Which a lot of talented people. It doesn't just happen in boxing. You've seen it happen with other sports stars. I mean, George Best is a prime example. Alex Hurricane Higgins in snooker. Paul Gascoigne. Well, Paul Gascoigne didn't let any people down on the pitch. He never let people down. He had some problems outside, but George Best was retired when he was 27. I mean, you think about that in this day and age, and retired not at the top, playing in a lower league. So that happens sometimes with people, because you've got a God-given talent. It's not just good enough. You also need that discipline. But maybe then by having discipline, you're not the same person. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, he was brought out. With Mike Tyson, he was brought out of so many problems that they think they can get away with anything.
Shake his hand now if you met him?
I haven't seen him. Well, I've not been anywhere where he's been since. Would I shake his hand? No, I wouldn't want to shake his hand for. I've got nothing, he's not a friend of mine.
Fight that you'll be unfortunately linked with one of the most high-profile fights in British boxing. Certainly, the recent history: Nigel Benn versus Gerald McClellan. Infamous in both positive and negative lights, obviously, that night. Talk to me about that night. Strange even to look back now, considering all of the changes that happened. I mean, talk to me first about the kind of the promotion and the build-up to that fight. Well,
the build-up was, Nigel at that time had a guy looking after him called Peter De Freitas. So because what you do in this business, I don't go and talk straight to the fight, and these sometimes are the problems. The person you speak to, the manager or whoever their agent is you discuss something, and it's the way they deliver the message. And Peter De Freitas, Nigel, we made the fight. The fight was ordered. It was a lower weight, if you may recall, Gerald McClellan. He came up a weight. He's with Don King, and he became the mandatory for Nigel. So it's a fight that had to take place, or Nigel had to vacate. And Nigel was under the impression that everybody was trying to get him beat, including me, which was ridiculous. What's the point? What's good for me in Gerald McClellan beating Nigel Benn? I mean, he goes back to America. There's nothing in it for me, if you want to look at it financially. So it was a pretty ridiculous position. But we had a situation where he was quite uncooperative with the PR. We'd sold out, but you still want to get the viewers. It was on ITV, show back on Showtime. You still want the publicity because you want to deliver big numbers. The bigger the numbers are, better it is for the boxer, because next time you say, right, this is what the audience was, we want more money. More money goes to the boxer. Great for everyone. And press conference, we had a little bit of a fallout, and Nigel and I had words which you can read about in my autobiography, and you can see in my documentary.
I didn't know you had a documentary coming out, Frank.
I thought I might mention it as an aside. And then anyway, the fight took place, but it was an electric moment. It's at London Arena, a place that I was instrumental in, building. McClellan was a big puncher, and he came in, and he got rid of his trainer, Emmanuel Stewart, and his manager before the fight. And he brought these two guys in who no one ever heard of. I've never seen them before in boxing. Like, one guy's wearing a sailor's hat, and another fella, whoever they were. And that was his corner and his trainers. And he came out in the first round, and he had Nigel down a couple of times. And fortunately, Nigel got through the first round, but we all thought it was going to be over because he was a tremendous puncher. And then the second round was quite torrid as well for Nigel, and as it went on, then Nigel started getting back into the fight. And it was exciting. I remember the late Hugh McElvany. I can remember watching him. This is how exciting it was. He was standing on his seat. All the press sections, they were like someone holding their phones, sending a report back for the Sunday papers, but cheering him. It was the most electric fight, brutal fight, and turned out to be a tragic fight. And eventually Nigel came through. And in that corner, you kept seeing Gerald kept blinking a lot. And I honestly do believe if Emmanuel Stewart had been in the corner, there might have been another outcome. He may have picked up on what that was. I mean, it's a benefit of hindsight from my point of view, And anyway, he got taken to hospital, and he was then put in a drug-induced coma because he had an operation on his brain to relieve the swelling because he had a bleeding of the brain. And that was the start of a pretty torrid and horrible time for him and his family. And it was quite awful, and there was a lot of things being said. A lot of comments, which I remember at the time. A comment was made about Don King, which was untrue. I was there the whole time. Every time anybody went to the hospital, if King went to the hospital, I was there. I heard everything. And there's all these things about Don standing at the foot of his bed and calling him a quitter and all that. Well, no one stood at the foot of his bed. He was in intensive care. No one was allowed in there. It was just bullshit. But it made great copy, if you want to call it great copy. These days they call it fake news, whatever you want to call it. So there was a lot of things going on like that, and it was sad and tragic. And his family, we brought his family over. We flew them all over, try and do our best to accommodate them and look after them. But obviously they wanted to get their son and brother home, and eventually he travelled back, and he obviously had quite a few problems. There was a big thing about the money, about what he got after the fight. He had some advances. One of the things that happened was that Emmanuel Stewart, who's a great trainer, whatever, but Emmanuel took all his money. The money that it was legitimately due to him, management money, etc. But he took it from the purse. That came off the purse. So when it comes to settling the purse, that's nothing to do with King or anybody. That came from Emmanuel decided he was going to take his money. Would you take your money off a guy who's in a coma, or who's, would you take that? I don't think I would, but that's what happened. So that was one of the things that happened. And it was pretty awful, and I questioned the sport at the time and my involvement in it. And I remember talking to Adrian Whiteson, Dr. Adrian Whiteson, who was the chief medical officer of the Boxing Board of Control. And he said, look, tragedy is happening in all walks of life, and we know that boxing's a sport where you are punching somebody, you're going to hurt them, or you could hurt them. And he said all we can ever do is to try and make it safer and learn from it. And some out of that bad, some good did happen. Thankfully, on the night, one thing we did do. Normally, the board have they tell you how many what your medical requirements are on the night. So you have an ambulance, etc. We had 2 ambulances there. We doubled everything. Not for any reason. Luckily, we did. That's what we did that night. 2 of everything, which I believe, could have, in some ways, helped. Gerald could have been much worse than it was, and it was bad as it is. but it could have been much worse.
And something that somebody else that you know well, Donald McRae, a celebrated boxing writer, sports writer, somebody who you had a large influence on his very well-known book, Dark Trade. If you're watching this interview and you haven't read that book, then shame on you, go and read it. Don speaks in that book about the night with Gerald McClellan and Nigel Benn, but he also talks about, obviously, Eubank and Michael Watson. I've asked this question of, I think I spoke to Nissa Sowland, who was involved with Edward Goodnecht, who was unfortunately hurt by George Groves. When you're a promoter and you put on a show and somebody does unfortunately get hurt on the show, what's that like for you? I mean, you mentioned you saw him in intensive care. What's that like? What goes through your head as the promoter?
Well, you look and first of all you look at them and you think of his family, because the family are there. So imagine what they must be going through. You know, the fighter's fighting for his life, or his life's not going to be the same. You know, there are guys who've had injuries and come out of it. They've been okay. Obviously, they can't box again. But you get guys who will go and box again. That kid from went and fought down in Plymouth last year. He shouldn't have been fighting. People encourage him to get in the ring, and you wonder about how that happens. But yourself, you look at it, you think, well, you just look at it and you think to yourself, this is not what's supposed to be. But it does happen. On rare occasions, it happens, but it does happen. It's a dangerous sport. That's why every boxer should be aware of the dangers when they step into the ring. And all we can do as people who are involved in it, if we care about the boxers and care for the sport, is to try and keep improving as much as you can the precautions that you put in, the checkups before fights, that boxers are not cheating in making weight, because that's a big problem. That certainly was a big problem in the 90s with boxers going into saunas and taking weight off, and that is a dangerous place and a dangerous thing for boxers to do. Any form of dehydration, the brain sits in a fluid. So if you can't make the weight, then don't fight at that weight. Go up a weight. But you get guys who do things like that, and that can contribute. And I think that contributed as well to Gerald McClellan. I don't think he trained. I know he didn't train as well as he should have done. So maybe, and I know he was going up a weight, and maybe he felt comfortable. I don't know, but I think that may have been a contributory factor into where he is today. But it's an awful feeling for anybody, not just the promoter, anybody involved in it. You look at it and it's a real terrible place to be, horrible place to be for the boxer, dreadful place to be for everybody around him, his family, and you're there and you're watching this and you were involved in it. And you do question it.
Do you ever question your future in the sport when something like that happens?
I have done, but I honestly do believe, I like to believe that I've helped certainly in British boxing, and been instrumental, I think, in getting and improving the boxers' lot medically. I remember paying, I'm not sure the exact time, but back around that time when the board introduced the MRI scans, I paid for every single boxer in the country to have, or who they sent forward to pay for their MRI scans. And no other promoter put any money in. No one, I think, which was quite surprising. Did that, even with a dreadful situation with Michael Watson when he was fighting the Boxing Board of Control, who were fighting him in a court case about the injuries he sustained in the fight against Chris Eubanks. I'd never promoted him, but I got them together in a room. I said, "It's ridiculous what you're doing here. I think the board has spent about £1.25 million on legal fees, and God knows how much he's spent. Why are you spending all this money? This is crazy. You've got to sort this out. This man's in a wheelchair, and you are. It's no good saying you knew the risk when you got in there. You also have to be there to protect the boxer. And I just didn't see the sense of all this money being spent when they could have sorted this out, and we eventually did sort it out. I put some money in to help. We run a show for him as well, guaranteed, underwrote that he would get at least £200,000 back in those days, and we delivered for him. We got it there, and Michael, and I never, as I say, never promoted, but I just felt that boxing had an obligation there, and it was crazy what was going on. It was just horrible. And Michael's sort of, he's a brave guy. He shows what a fighter is. He brought himself back. I mean, when you look at him sort of walking that marathon, that tells you what he's made of. And thankfully, he's financially, he's got some comfort level there to help him in his difficult life that he has at the moment. But all you can do is help. A lot of people talk about it. A lot of people don't do nothing about it. A lot of people, I've said it before. When a promoter's sitting in a sauna with a fighter the night before a title fight, and then his son's tweeting out he can't get any more weight up. Do you not understand? Do you not realise what has happened in this sport because of things like that? And it's not even you saying the fighter's in the sauna. His dad's sitting in the sauna with him. So that is where you draw the line about, what do you want from this sport? What is it about? Is it about keep looking at the bottom line, the cash? Or is it about looking after the welfare of the person that you're involved with, the boxer you're involved with, and also the welfare of the sport? And that's why I get, people say, oh, I would say this, but I would say it because, you know what? At least I've tried and done things to try and help the sport. And, I've pulled fights. I mean, recently we had Ryan Garner, not once, twice fainting at the way. They wanted him to fight. I know the board would not allow him to, but before he even got that, I said, he ain't getting in the ring. Forget about it. It's just not going to happen. How can you even think about it? I know why he fainted. Because the lazy little sod never trained, and he's gone and taken the weight off, and that's what it's all about. You can't let someone get in the ring after that. You just cannot let that happen. It's bad enough. You can't let it happen when they're fainting. Everybody's there and seen that happen. How can you let that happen? Madness. But there are people who do that, and that's why this sport is a bastard sport sometimes. There's no coordination between all the governing bodies working on this, collectively working together, sharing information. Because the only way you're going to stop things like this is sharing information. And now, what I started doing when I was a kid, what they called unlicensed boxing, wasn't licensed by the board, that's the norm now. That is the norm. You look at it, you've got these white collar, blue collar fights, all these guys doing it all the time. What's the medical supervision over that? I have no idea what this is. It's just suddenly everything's boxing. KSI fighting, the other kid he fought, his name Logan, the first fight, that's a white collar fight. I mean, the second one's a white collar fight. They're not any amateur experience or anything. That's what they are what they are. Good luck to them earning money, and it's great. Not knocking them. All I'm saying is don't look at that is what you would call out and out professional boxing. These are guys that have no amateur experience and have no professional experience either. Just jumping in the ring, settling their differences. Good luck to them. I've got a problem with earning money, but that is not that for me is not what the sport I'm involved with, boxing. That is not boxing. That's two guys duking it out in the ring to see who's the keyboard king, or who's the top banker, or who's the top, I don't know, whatever. Two fellas having a fight. It's like, let's get it on now with Piers Morgan and Alan Sugar. Let's get that on. That's all it. But it's all it is, isn't it? It's no different than that. And if they want to do it, good luck to them, and they know what the risk they're taking. But do not confuse that with what I think is our sport. Our sport's a bit more, when I say it cynically, it's more purer than that, and that's what it is. I've got to take my hat off to them. I'm not knocking them. I have no intention of doing that, but do not confuse that with what we do.
Final question. For today, anyway, I think this is something that could take several parts. Sorry, Frank, you might have to spend a little bit more time with me than you'd like to. We're less than a week of 30 years since you were shot. That night in 1989. I don't think I've, knowingly at least, ever spoken to anybody who's been shot. So why don't you tell me about kind of the incident itself, really?
It hurts. And it makes you jump. Yeah, listen, it's a funny thing. I mean, I honestly do not. I don't even think about it. I don't know if it's consciously I put it at the back of my mind because I might get angry, but I don't think about it. And at the end of the day, I didn't realise it's 30 years ago. My God, it was just a surreal experience. You know, it's a surreal experience, and it nearly, you know, you want to make comebacks. If there was a comeback, that was that, because that obviously put me right on the back foot. It caused me a lot of problems financially with London Arena, a business. We were just about to do a syndication with a group of banks for London Arena, who were going to take 49% of the business for a lot of money, which would have been brilliant. But it all fell apart because I got shot, and what's going on here? That's what happened. So financially, it was a problem. It was a problem for my family. But I had to be strong, and I had to get through it and do what I do, which I discharged myself from hospital. I lost a lot of weight, discharged myself from hospital, and got on with my business.
Now, it's interesting you would say that, because the first thing you said was, you know, it affected my business, and then obviously it affected your family. What you didn't mention is the physical effects that it had on yourself. I mean, you've kind of put the business and then the family and then yourself third. What was it like for you? I mean, you discharged yourself, I believe, after 10 days in the hospital against doctor's orders.
About after 10 days, yeah. I just discharged myself. I come out of the hospital, and it was just a horrible time. You know, it makes you. I thought about a lot of things at the time, and it was like a bit of a wake-up call for me, irrespective of what happened. But it's a wake-up call how my life was being led. How I was leading my life.
What were your memories of the actual incident?
I just remember a bang. I thought it was a car backfiring. And I looked around, and I see somebody with a mask on standing there, and I remember his hand was shaking. And I heard a click, and nothing, just a click. And I thought it was a joke to start with, but it wasn't. Then suddenly a bang, and then posh, hit me there. I thought it hit me here, but it came out. And then I can remember it was too far away for me to grab hold of him. And I went round the other side of the car, and my partner then was he was a barrister, solicitor, became a barrister called John Bottress. He ran at him, grabbed him, and put him on the floor, which was a very brave thing to do. I mean, you know, he wasn't like one of the guys from the streets or anything. He was a blue from Trinity College, Oxford. And I always remember I remember him shouting out. He's going, "What the fuck are you doing?" And it sounded quite strange. But anyway, on the floor, and that was it.
And then your next memory is was it waking up in hospital? Was it with the wife?
I remember everything. Now, it's a funny thing of witnesses. There was one witness there, late Jonathan Rendell, who's written a couple of books and had written a book. He was involved with Conor McMillan. And his police statement was that he see a couple of black guys, and he remembers me. He remembers sees these black guys hanging outside, and he see me being put into an ambulance and taken away. Well, there was no ambulance; they were on strike. The ambulance was on strike, and I was bundled into the back of a police van. And I remember doing a 3-point turn, bumping up the curb, and I'm going. And I remember, and the doctor, the border control doctor, I remember he said. "You got a hanky?" And I'm bleeding. And he says, "Hold the hanky." So I'm holding a hanky on my chest, banging around, driving to this called Brook Hospital, which was in ironically a road called Shooters Hill. And I went up in the hospital, and it was cutting clothes off and all that sort of stuff, and that was it.
I didn't mean to laugh when you said Shooters Hill, but that was quite. What was that like for your family? I mean, at the time, I'd imagine that your boys were very young around the time.
Kids, yeah. I mean, Henry, my wife, was pregnant with him at the time, and the police went to the house, and they told her that I was like 50-50 to make it through the night, and she probably thought it was a Gladys Knight song. But anyway, so at the end of the day, she came down, and they brought me around the next day, and that was it.
Then obviously there was the trial, which featured one of your ex-fighters, Terry Marsh. What was that like? I mean, I'd imagine that must have been painful in a different way, but going through that sort of thing and the rigmarole of bringing your family into court for something like that must have been very stressful.
Well, my family didn't go. I mean, I because I was the guy who got shot, so I gave my evidence as I said. I said I don't know who did it. I couldn't see who did it, and that's with the evidence. So that was that. And I think eventually he was got off. I think it was a majority decision, whatever it was. But that's what it was.
Okay, well, I think we're probably about there for today, Frank. I've robbed enough of Netflix's content for one day.
You want to? The real stuff is going to be on that documentary and the book, which will be coming out next year.
Yeah, we heard that once or twice today already, Frank.
Well, I just thought I'd give it a mention. Seeing as I don't get a fee for this, I thought I'd get something out of it.
You get my undying love and respect. Frank Warren,
Yeah, thank you.
always a pleasure catching up with you. I'm sure people will be hassling me for a third part of this as they have for this part. So hopefully people who have been asking about this enjoy it as much as they did the first one. And if you've got anything that you'd like to know from Frank, pop it in the comments and we'll see if we can ask him in part 3.
Why don't you do that? Do a Q&A.
Frank Warren, always a pleasure.
Cheers, mate. All the best.
That was great.